Bonjour, expats. Welcome to France and congratulations on your new job with La Meilleure Compagnie. Today, a series of trainers will be taking you through various topics which will give you the tools needed to be successful in your new role. And with that, Ashley Gonzalez will now walk you through the differences in French employment laws from the United States. Take it away, Ashley.
Welcome again to orientation. My name is Ashley and I will be going over employment laws. First, we will be discussing written employment contracts in France. There may be a written contract required if you are working fixed term or part-time. They do have to be in French. There may be certain provisions in the agreement, including intellectual property rights, confidentiality, and non-competition clauses. Employers can require workers to sign non-compete agreements only if the company can prove that in doing so is necessary to protect the company's interests, and they may pay a worker until the non-compete agreement expires, 30% of the worker's pay, and it will usually last a year. Now that we've talked a little bit about employment contracts, let's talk about protecting your employment, severance pay, and work councils. Unlike the United States, France does not have employment at will. However, there must be a legal and fair reason to fire an employee. You must follow specific procedure that provides invitation to pre-dismissal meeting and a letter. The employer must pay dismissal indemnity calculated according to the employee's average pay and seniority in the company. However, if the case is a serious misconduct, no pay will be given. If the dismissal is not justified, an additional pay of indemnity capped by French law and depends on the dismissed worker's seniority, salary, and harm suffered will be given. For work councils, this is if the company employs at least 11 workers for a full year. They have to create a committee of elected employees. They will represent concerns and complaints to the company leaders. Companies with at least 50 employees, the committee's role is more substantial. They consult with company leaders on decisions regarding company's organization, management, and general operations. Social and cultural activities for employees as well. Next, we're going to talk about work visas. We've already talked about employment contracts, dismissals, and work councils. You may need a work visa unless you have a family member who has a permit for certain types of highly skilled work. You may be able to go without a permit. Most others needs permission to work in France. The authorization must be granted before the visa is obtained. This is something we will organize for you. If you were working less than 90 days, we may be able to get you a temporary work permit. French Ministry of Labor or convention must stamp the work visa. This authorization goes to the French embassy where you apply for your visa. More than 90 days, you must apply for a long-stay work visa, also your residence permit. Employer draws up the work contract and sends it to the local French Ministry of Labor. If the directee approves the contract, it is sent to the Office Français d'Immigration or OFII. Once approved, it goes to the French embassy in your home country. On arrival in France, you will have to register with the Office Français or OFII. Now that we've taken a look at employment laws such as written contracts, dismissal, work councils, and work visa, let's take a look at how your work week would look as well as vacation. So working in the US, standard work week is 40 hours. Anything over that is considered overtime. Whereas in France, the law caps at 5 days a week at 35 hours. You can work no more than 10 hours in a day, and over 35 hours are considered overtime. Very different from what the US is. Your vacation, you get 30 days of paid vacation per year. Collective bargaining agreements can provide more paid vacation days or more leave days based on the employee's seniority. So again, very different, whereas in the US, the companies will structure how much time you get. Some companies go based off of your seniority. Here in France, you get a 30 days of paid vacation right away. Minimum wage, however, is a little bit lower. It's at 10.03 euros or $11.39. However, collective bargaining can provide a higher minimum wage. Lastly, we'll be covering maternity and parental leave and sick time. For mothers, they can take up to 6 weeks of paid maternity leave before a baby is due. Up to 10 weeks after the baby is born. They could get longer if they deliver more than one child or if there's already 2 or more living in the home already. New fathers can take up to 3 days of paid leave after the child is born and up to 11 days during the first 4 months after birth. Adopting, you can get 10 weeks of paid leave and 22 weeks if you adopt more than one child. Very different from the US. The US does not have any set standards for maternity or paternity leave. Every company has its own standards. Now for sick pay, this is also going to be very different from the US. For the US, most companies give out sick pay, hours that you are able to use. However, French, the first 3 days of sick leave, employers are not required by French law, but collective bargaining can provide otherwise. So for the first 3 days, companies are not required to pay, but after that, the third day the employee is on sick leave, they receive 59% to 66.66% of their pay, which comes from the French Social Security system. Seventh day, employers must supplement the Social Security pay that an employee receives at minimum 90% of their full pay for the next 30 days and 66% following 30 days. And of course, as we've heard, collective bargaining can provide more at any time. So very, very different from the US in the sense that they do get a little bit more when it comes to sick time and maternity leave. So now I will be turning it over to Kira, who's going to cover the key differences between French and American business culture.
The differences in business culture between France and the United States. Private lives. In France, it is inappropriate to ask what someone's job is right away, whereas Americans tend to make their career their identity. Coworkers will not share personal information and often will not have any family photos in their workspace. There are government regulations placed on work hours, family and vacation time, as those are all seen as very important. The French work 35 hours a week, and overtime is seen as being unproductive, as the French value productivity rather than time spent on a project. It is seen that if you cannot get your work done in the 35 hours, you are not using your time appropriately. And finally, French law states the right to disconnect, that employees do not have to check emails outside of work hours. Lunch. Unless you have been invited for a lunch meeting, do not call or try to meet during lunch hours. The French tend to take longer lunch breaks, often going to restaurants to relax with a multi-course meal and some wine. Coffee and cigarette breaks are common, and coffee is enjoyed for the taste and experience rather than the caffeine. The coffee and cigarette breaks are often taken in groups, as these are seen as social events. And finally, work meals are required to be subsidized, and if your workplace does not have a subsidized cafeteria, then they must provide you with meal vouchers for restaurants. Vacation time. Workers in France not only have more vacation time, but they actually use it. They have 30 days minimum vacation time each year, and 89% of French workers take full advantage of this time, as opposed to the 57% of Americans that use theirs. It is common in France for workers to take an entire month off in the summer. Education. Education is divided into 3 stages in France: primary education, secondary education, and tertiary education. Primary and secondary, while having private options, will typically be public, whereas tertiary will be mostly private, with many establishments focusing on a single subject area. Tertiary establishments are very selective, leading to moderate class sizes. There is vocational training available for working employees, as education is very important in France, and computer literacy is expected in all businesses in France. Manners. While la bise, or cheek kissing, is a common greeting, one would not greet coworkers like this unless you are close friends. One must keep hands out of their pockets while out in public. One should try to speak French rather than starting conversations in English, as this would show that you are at least attempting to learn the language. It is often considered bad taste to discuss one's wealth in conversation. It is also rude to ask a French person about their political leanings or about their salary. Business. Americans tend to sugarcoat negative feedback, whereas in France, they are straightforward with negative feedback and positive feedback is rarely given. Debates in the workplace are seen as healthy, whereas Americans try to avoid debates in the workplace. Meetings in France will typically last longer because of this, seeing as debating is not only encouraged but expected. Employees are expected to be well-groomed and in stylish work attire, as formality is very important. Managers will be much more hands-on and authoritative. This will often slow down bureaucracy, which is very important in France. All decisions are based in logic, and an emphasis is placed on data gathering, analysis, and final planning stages. And finally, workers are only paid once a month, typically at the end of the month.
Thank you, Kira, for walking us through the differences between French and American business culture. My name's Philip Abishan, and now I'd like to talk to you about the differences between French and American social culture so that you can not only be successful at work, but also be successful in your social life. So let's start off first and foremost with French food versus American food. As an expat from the United States, you probably have a lot of processed food in your diet, as in hot dogs, sugary cereals and sodas, and basically a lot of high fructose corn syrup, a lot of preservatives and additives. The USDA does not have a system to reevaluate chemicals in American food, which is why you see so many more preservatives and food coloring in the American diet. Fast food is also commonplace in the United States. You see fast food restaurants on every corner, and most Americans eat fast food dozens of times per year. Americans also tend to eat very quickly, and we tend to eat large portions of our food as well. French food, on the other hand, is an experience. You eat more slowly. You tend to enjoy your food. You have multiple courses. Um, and it's a huge part of French culture. So pairing food with drinks is a daily experience. You also never eat at your desk at work for lunch breaks. That's really frowned upon in France. France also has something called the Center for Science in the Public Interest. And what it does is it reevaluates what food additives like chemicals and food dye can be added to food. So most French food has fewer additives and preservatives, making it, more organic and healthier for you. So because food is such an important aspect of French culture, dining out is very popular and commonplace in France. So what are you going to expect when you go to a restaurant for your first time? Servers are not going to take your order as soon as you sit down to the table, and they're not going to ask you when you're ready to order. You can sit there for as long as you'd like, and as long as you have your menu open, you will not be bothered. The way that you signify that you want to order is that you're just going to close your menu and put it on the table, and then the server will come over. And then the server's not going to constantly check back with you either, like they will in the United States. They're not typically not working for tips, and so they tend to let you enjoy your dining experience instead of, the the turn and burn that you have at most U.S. restaurants. Um, and so even though tipping is not the primary driving force behind the servers, they do get tipped, but French law requires that their tips are automatically included on your bill. And so you don't have to leave a tip on top of that, but it is customary to round up to the nearest euro as an additional tip, but it's not anything to the same degree as you'll see in the United States. You also won't be rushed out of the restaurant either once you're finished eating. You're welcome to sit and enjoy your time because, again, this is more about the experience of your meal as opposed to just eating and leaving. So on that note, you can expect your lunches and dinners to take a minimum of 1 hour, but more than likely you're going to be pushing 2 hours. Another thing that's very interesting about France is that they are very particular about keeping the language pure. And what we mean by that is that using English as an example, English is always changing and they're always incorporating words from other languages and constantly adding to their dictionary. Some examples of words that we say all the time in English that are actually French-based words or French words altogether are apostrophe, aviation, bachelor, brunette, energy. These all originated in France, but they're incorporated into the English language. France does not like to do that, and they have actually an institution that's set up to manage the French language in order to preserve its purity. That organization is called the L'Académie Française, and they set the rules for spoken and written word in France. And these are, in fact, rules and not merely suggestions. L'Académie Française discourages the use of loanwords from other languages. So aside from the Latin-based words, you're not going to see a lot of English-based or Germanic words in the French language. Another important topic that's going to be crucial for you ensuring that your social life goes smooth is etiquette and formality, especially when dealing with people you don't know very well. The French are much more formal in their interactions with strangers than Americans, where Americans like to abbreviate or, instead of saying hello, you'll say hey. French don't do that. So when you're in a setting outside a close group of friends or family, you're going to want to be as formal as possible. So, for an example, when saying please, you would say s'il vous plaît in most settings. Now, if you're with a close group of friends or with family, you would say s'il te plaît. And the only difference in that is just one is a formal way of saying please and the other is informal. So on that same note of staying formal in non-intimate settings, when you're speaking with someone, you always want to use their title, their prefix title. So Monsieur for sir, Madame for a married woman or an adult woman, or Mademoiselle for an adolescent or a young adult unmarried woman. When you greet people, men will typically shake hands with each other. A man may kiss a woman's cheek if she offers. Women will often kiss each other on the cheek, so be ready for that if you are in fact a woman. And if a woman expects to be kissed, she may offer her cheek to a man. So if you are a man, if she offers, go ahead and give her cheek a kiss. If not, then a handshake is perfectly acceptable. And small children are almost always expected to be kissed. And just a side note, if you're unsure of what to do, just watch the person you're greeting and take their lead. All right, and last but not least, I just wanted to leave you with a couple other suggestions. If you're ever invited to a party, it is polite to bring a small present. Nothing major, but a small present like candies, flowers, or hors d'oeuvres. But keep in mind that foreign food or drinks are typically not well received unless they're especially high class. Also, as an American, we tend to speak in direct terms and we cut to the chase, and we're usually very succinct with our wording. But the French love detail and context when having conversations. So it can sometimes be perceived as being rude if you don't elaborate on what you're talking about. And on that same note, the French do love to have heated conversations on controversial subjects. Um, in today's world, Americans typically, we tend to be offended by people who don't agree with them, or we tend to shy away from those difficult conversations. Uh, but in France, the French people actively seek out those types of conversations. So if you are in a conversation and someone brings up a controversial subject and pushes you for your opinion or pushes back against your opinion, don't be offended. It's just the way that the French like to operate. And with that, I hope that this information will get you off on the right foot in your social life in France. And now Jessica will take you through the government structure in France.
So in this section, we will discuss the government structure in France. So if you're moving to France, you might want to know what exactly the government structure is like. So France is also known as the French Republic. So the French Republic was founded on September 21st, 1972 during the French Revolution. So what type of government does France have? They have a semi-presidential government that characterizes the Republic of France, where there is both a president and prime minister that share executive powers. The framework for the current government of France was laid out in the 1958 Constitution of the Fifth Republic. Just a fun fact. So how did France get its name? France comes from the Latin word Francia, meaning country of the Franks. The Franks might refer to Germanic words for javelin or free. Government of France. So France's government is divided into an executive, a legislative, and a judicial branch, much like here in the United States. Once the president appoints the prime minister, he or she must be approved by the lower house of parliament and the National Assembly. So I have inserted a little graph picture so you can see how it starts off with the Republic of France, and then we have below that the judicial, executive, and legislative branches. Functions of the French government. So according to the Constitution of the French Fifth Republic, the government directs and decides the policy of the nation. The current president of the French Republic is Emmanuel Macron. He is a French politician who has been serving as the president of France since May 14, 2017. The head of the state, the president, is elected every 5 years by a majority vote during a general election. There are usually 2 rounds. If there is no clear majority winner after the first round of voting, a second is held a few weeks later. Jean Castex was appointed Prime Minister of France by President Emmanuel Macron on July 3, 2020. The Prime Minister holds the second highest office in France after the President and has no term limit. The Prime Minister can be replaced by the President at any time. France has a bicameral parliament with 2 houses, which are known as the National Assembly and the Senate. I've included a picture of the President and the Prime Minister in this slide. The government of France has an executive branch, and the executive branch of the French government has 2 leaders. It has the President of the Republic, who is head of the state and is elected for a 5-year term by the people, and it has a Prime Minister who leads the government. In the presentation, I've included a chart that shows the President and the Prime Minister and their duties. The President is directly elected by the French people every 5 years, and the French Constitution declares him head of state and gives him control over foreign policy and defense. The President names the Prime Minister, and the President can dissolve the National Assembly, and the Assembly can remove the Prime Minister through a vote of no confidence. The Prime Minister serves as the head of the government and oversees domestic policy and day-to-day governing. He also recommends for presidential approval for the other members of his cabinet and may propose legislation for Parliament's approval, or he may issue decrees, for example, executive orders within certain constraints. The Prime Minister usually is the first person to go when there is any serious trouble between the President and the Assembly, or when the President explicitly wants to show he is changing his policy. Executive power is exercised by the President of the Republic and the government. In this slide, we will discuss the ministries, who are also part of the executive branch. The ministers and the ministers of state are appointed by the President of the Republic upon a proposal of the Prime Minister. Their powers are centered around two main missions. Like departments in the U.S., ministries split responsibilities in the executive branch. Each ministry is divided into directions, in which are turned and headed by a minister. Some examples are the Ministry of the Armed Forces, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Solidarity and Health, Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs. Ministers are responsible for the supervision of public legal entities acting within their ministerial department's field of competence. They do not hold regulatory power except in the administration over their ministerial departments. In this slide, we will discuss the government of France and the legislative branch. The Parliament of France makes up the legislative branch, and it consists of two houses, the National Assembly and the Senate. Divided between the National Assembly and the Senate, much like Congress in the United States, the Senate's powers are limited. National Assembly has the last word if they do not agree. The lower house in French political system is called the National Assembly and are elected in a two-stage voting system. A candidate who receives more than 50% of the vote in the first round is elected. All elections are held on a Sunday morning. The National Assembly tends to specialize in scrutinizing day-to-day government business. In case of a disagreement with the Senate, the position of the National Assembly prevails. The upper house, known as the Senate, tends to specialize in constitutional matters and foreign affairs, including European. Senate members are indirectly elected by an electoral college, and members serve a 6-year term. In this slide, we will discuss the government of France and the judicial branch. The courts in France are divided into two parts, the judicial courts and the administrative courts. Public law is applied in the administrative courts. The highest of the judiciary courts is the Supreme Court of Appeals. The power of the judicial review is vested in a separate constitutional court, which is a unique creation of the Fifth Republic. The court consists of 9 members, one appointment made by each president, the president of the Senate, and the president of the National Assembly, every 3 years for a 9-year term, non-renewable term. This is comparable to the United States, in which the president makes all the appointments to the Supreme Court, and the appointments are for a lifetime. The French government in a nutshell. When you are considering moving to another country, such as France, it is important to understand how the government and political systems work. It is also a good idea to grasp an understanding of how the crime and legal systems also work, as well as human and civil rights, women's rights, and LGBTQI rights as well. After all, these may be determining factors when it comes to deciding whether to move there at all.
Hello. COVID-19 in France. On December 12, 2019, COVID had reached France. Officially, French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe announced France would be under lockdown. During the coronavirus pandemic, the Prime Minister announced the closure of pubs, restaurants, cinemas, and nightclubs. Before the Prime Minister made his announcement, French President Emmanuel Macron addressed that all schools and universities across the country would be closed. Slowly but surely, the number of persons in gathering was smaller. COVID-19 in France led to France being under lockdown, non-essentials workers were out of work, and France landed in a recession. The country recorded many cases throughout the pandemic, France on their 6th wave of COVID, and in the middle of a French presidential runoff. During pandemic, the government is releasing a support plan for businesses. Shutting economic activity down called for the French government to build a budget a total of 15 plus billion euros. State help paid for a part of employee salary, cost, social security, and offer a state guaranteed loan. During the pandemic, 143,156 deaths were totaled. 26,698,300 confirmed cases. U.S. Embassy and consulates in France. COVID-19 traveler information could be found www.state.gov. France approved a COVID-19 vaccine for use, Novavax. There is antigen test available for U.S. citizens. Health pass and vaccines no longer required to enter venues in France, apart from hospitals and nursing homes. Commercial flight and public transportation are operating. To find more information, please visit usembassy.gov/COVID-19 information. Please excuse me for butchering the French language, but as the French would say, ne passe ta garde, meaning don't let your guard down.
Hello everyone, my name is Donna and I'm going to be going over some hot topics / issues in France. The first topic I want to touch on is a startup company called Alkin, and it is a Franco-American investment. A French pharmaceutical company by the name of Sanofi invested 180 million in this startup. It is a AI-assisted method in medicine, and it's developed a platform with predictive algorithms that aim to improve research into and development of new treatments against cancer. And cancer being all types, they're looking in, right now their main focuses are lung cancer, breast cancer, and multiple myeloma, which is a type of bone cancer. The projected initial $90 million that was invested over the span of 3 years has already proven to show successful. They have already got a return of close to $1 billion on this startup, just by the fact that it's becoming a very forward-leading modern medicine investment company. The pharmaceutical company giant is trying to use this platform to optimize its clinical trials by finding new biomarkers to develop models that will predict treatment outcomes for cancer patients. So they're trying to use this model by using the history of current patients, their medical history, to predict which patients will have the best outcome to certain treatments. So it's trying to really lead the roadway in a treatment that will best benefit the cancer patient and give them the longest lifespan. The next topic I want to talk about is what they're calling the France 2030 plan, and this is a plan that the president has already put in place, that it has 10 objectives in different sectors that he wants to have accomplished by the year 2030. They've already spent 3 to 4 billion in 2022. The sectors that they are investing in are the energy sector, the future transport, food, health, culture field, and space and seabeds. So the first sector we're going to talk about is the energy sector. Their 3 objectives here are to help develop innovative small-scale nuclear reactors with better waste management. Their second objective is to become the leader in green hydrogen In 2030, France will have the least 2 gigafactories and electrolyzers mass producing hydrogen and all useful associated technologies. And their last objective is to decarbonize France's industry by reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 35% compared to their numbers in 2015, which not only does this, of course, benefit France, but it also, benefits the world, especially with the greenhouse gas emissions. The next sector we're going to talk about is going to be future transport. Their two objectives in this sector are going to be to produce nearly 2 million electric and hybrid vehicles, which we have already started seeing with all of these cars or these companies, these big manufacturing companies that are wanting to change over to electric cars and vehicles to lower the amount of toxic fumes that are coming out of these gas run vehicles. And their next one is to produce the first low carbon aircraft. The next sector is going to be the food sector, and the president's objective in this one is to invest in a healthy, sustainable, and traceable diet. He has contributed $2 billion into just this sector to make France, the farming and the agriculture in France traceable to where they're not using so many pesticides, they're not using so many harmful chemicals in growing their food for their stores. Alrighty, the next sector we're going to talk about is the healthcare sector. He has contributed 3 billion euros to this sector, and his objective is to produce 20 biopharmaceuticals against cancer and chronic diseases, including those related to age, and to create the medical devices of tomorrow. And this kind of goes and coincides with the company that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, Auken, which they are using is a platform that they developed to find certain biomarkers to have the predictive measurement to see which course of treatment is going to have the best outcome for these cancer patients. And so that way they can get started on these treatments and have the best possible lifespan for the cancer that they were diagnosed with. So France is really big on trying to be a leader in, especially with the healthcare industry, and trying to develop different platforms and, like this says, the medical devices of tomorrow. The next sector that he is wanting to develop and invest in is going to be the culture field. And his objective in this one is to place France once again at the head of the cultural and creative content production. 3 strategic regions have been identified: the Mediterranean Arc, the Ile-de-France, and the Nord. They will be the 3 great factories of the French touch. And the last sector that he is wanting to invest in is going to be the space and seabed, which he has contributed and designated 2 billion euros to. And his 2 objectives for this sector is to play our role in new space adventures, which of course is kind of like our NASA, where you're developing out. He's wanting to have new missions in outer space to continue to have missions and those sort of things. And then his other objective is to invest in the field of seabeds. So the last slide we're going to talk about is going to be 2 issues that I found pretty interesting that are happening in France. They're both due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The first one is unaccompanied migrant children's rights, and this is an issue that's going on, that authorities do not guarantee to accompanied migrant children access to basic rights and to the care which they are entitled. Child protection authorities in different regions of the country failed to provide shelter and other essential services even during the COVID-19 pandemic, putting them at further risk. In April, a court in France in Marseille Gap is the one that did not want to provide a shelter for these children, and these were teenagers that were living in a park, having to kind of fend for themselves because the French government was not giving them the shelter that by law they were entitled to because of the pandemic and fear. And the second one is going to be the women's rights. So when COVID happened, as everyone is pretty sure aware of, everybody was locked down. Nobody was allowed to leave their home, which the French authorities reported that domestic violence rose by 30% just in the first week that they were on lockdown. By December of 2020, which is the year COVID hit, 90 women had been killed by a current or former intimate partner in 2020. These were just outstanding, crazy numbers considering that everyone knew, as we know personally as well, when we were in lockdown that, you get to a headspace that obviously is not meant for some people, not just, especially kids who are abused at home. And I just found this as a very interesting topic and issue that even in France, their numbers were skyrocketing just as they were here. And what was good is Parliament approved a law in France that next year approving increasing sentences for perpetrators whose actions led to a victim's suicide or attempted suicide, and permitting doctors to break patient confidentiality in cases where they believe there is immediate danger to victim's life. This bill that they passed last year has helped in dramatically decreasing the number of domestic violence calls made to authorities. We hope you have enjoyed our presentation on France, and we thank you for your time, and let us know if you have any questions.
Okay, team, that's all we have for today. We hope you've enjoyed this training, and we feel that it'll give you the tools necessary to have a successful life here in France. Thank you.